Welcome back, everyone. I am the Depressed Dio, and this is Middara on Tabletop Simulator. This is just going to be an update, rules, mistakes, and lore video. In fact, I still have a bunch of backlog still coming. As always, I tend to record a lot of this game because I enjoy it quite a bit. And you also might notice that the layout has changed. This is the latest version as of me recording this, which includes Chapter 5 and all that good stuff. I was actually invited / asked to playtest Chapter 5's updates, and so I did on my personal playthrough. I went ahead and played through Chapter 5, and also took a look at some of the other encounters that I bypassed, just to make sure everything was working. So I pretty much know everything through Act 1 at this point. I've beaten Act 1. On my personal playthrough, I did start a new playthrough because of all the rules mistakes I've been making. So like I said, I'm not going to restart the Let's Play, but I definitely don't mind restarting my own personal playthroughs. I also specifically started a new playthrough just to fight Iceland and beat her through damage, because obviously I made rules mistakes on that fight. I have done it. Essentially, easiest way to deal with Iceland, and easy is a very, very rough term. Use a combination of, I think I have it down here, fortune telling, exalted summoning, summon Low and Paladin, which makes it so you roll a black die. Every book you roll, you can either give an ally a buff, or you can give an enemy a debuff, and the debuff bypasses conviction rolls. So step 1 is to make sure you get 3 to 4 books on your black die, which in this particular case, you would need to use rerolls to do. So you need to use a bunch of things like Bottle Blessings, and of course things like Bahamut's Blessing, and anything that allows you to reroll. Get yourself to 2 to 4 books, preferably 3 or 4. That way you can apply all status effects at once, and then start applying to Iceland. Start with poison first, and then obviously anytime an effect is applied to Iceland, Nightingale gets to roll a black die. Anytime it was a shield, if there's a shield on the die, which is 4 out of 6 chance, it would be applied to her instead. And what you would do then is, on poison, you would fortune tell it and make it so it doesn't have a shield, and that'll ensure that Iceland gets poison. And then the other key things you want to make sure she gets is you want to make sure she gets darkness. Darkness makes it so she only has 11 defense, and it completely makes it so she can't dodge, which means nimble becomes completely negated on her. Obviously, if you had to burn a fortune telling already, you would need to rely on rerolls to hopefully get it to stick on Nightingale, or you can let one of them stick, and if you happen to have an extra book to play with, you can use that to try to apply the darkness the second time. And if you happen to get both darkness and poison applied, go for Wilt, and if you get all 3, you got the Wombo combo, and you'll at least have a chance to beat her. Even with all that said, I still barely beat her. I even made an effort to carry Remy's gear on a different character to ensure I could throw the gear onto Remy so she was better prepared for the fight. I almost didn't even make it to Iceland because Remy nearly got wrecked just trying to escape. I had really, really bad luck there. But still, I did all that work. Had a specific build that worked with Remy because she works best as a 2-weapon user because of how the narrative plays out. And even then, I was about to turn away from death, but I still managed to beat Iceland with damage legit. And also with this harder stats, they did introduce an errata that finally actually gave Iceland a nerf. An actual real nerf, not that stupid heal 1 nonsense. It's actually a lot better. So I'm going to go ahead and show that off right now. So as you can see, biggest issues with Iceland is she has high conviction, high attack, has nimble, counters every attack that doesn't hit. So even doesn't matter if she dodges or not. If it misses, she's going to counter, and she just does a lot of damage. So, and obviously any effects that do get past the conviction check, there's a 2 in 3 chance that it goes on to Nightingale. So this is the card that is currently on Tabletop Simulator on the latest version, and then this is the new one. So big differences. The green die for her attack has been replaced with a teal die. Her conviction is no longer red and teal, it's now teal and orange. So that's a pretty big nerf. Her counterattack for Skirmisher, it's still for every attack, but she stops attempting to counter once she's done damage that turn. So she'll keep countering until she hits you and does a little bit of damage, or at least a point of damage. Once she does that damage, she'll stop countering for that turn. So that's better than nothing. Now, what's not listed in the errata cards, or at least I couldn't find it, is supposedly the 2 and 3 chance of transferring a buff is being reduced down to a 1 in 3. So I'm guessing it's probably the check is going to be like you need to have 4 of one symbol on the black die, in which case that's a 1 in 3 chance. So it's a little bit easier to get effects to stick on her. So that's kind of good. Overall, I think it's a pretty good improvement. Getting rid of the green die, replacing it with the teal die, will make it so she doesn't do such insane damage. It'll still be pretty insane, but at least it's a little bit more manageable. All right, so that was kind of. There's also some other errata updates. There's kind of a variety. Most of it's clarification. I think one thing, if I don't know if I have a cloak. Do I have a cloak? I don't have a cloak. So over here in I probably have one in the stash. Anyway, so cloaks provide protection, and protection used to be it gave you a black die whenever rolling a conviction check versus any spells. It's now been updated. Protection now applies for spells and effects. So anything like poison from like a cave sickle, that will apply for protection. This makes cloaks really, really good. Makes protection overall a really good effect to have on yourself. So definitely something to take advantage of. All right, like I said, there's a bunch of other things, but most of it's like clarification and all that. Now I'm gonna go ahead and there were some rules mistakes I made since my last rules mistake video. One of them I've been making consistently throughout the entire playthrough so far. Both good and bad. It was, good and bad for my opponents in some cases. That is SOI, Sphere of Influence. I was kind of treating it very similar to how range works, where line of sight could be blocked by, opponent figures and things like that. SOI does not. The only thing that blocks SOI is obstructing terrain. So anything with a red border blocks SOI. Everything else, it'll actually go through. So there were situations where I might have had it was an AoE and I had multiple characters, layers of characters, and the front layer was the only characters that got hit by the effect. That's not how it's supposed to work. SOI goes through everything, so it would have hit everyone. Now, I was applying this both ways. So in the case of someone like Justice, where I was trying to do AoEs, and I was very reluctant to use Temporal Cavitation, because I didn't feel like I was going to get hit many opponents because I thought I was only going to hit the front layer. It's actually a lot better. So just something to note. I've been actually making sure to keep up with that with my other groups I've been playing with. But yeah, so SOI goes through everything except for obstructing terrain. There might have been some other minor rules mistakes, but as far as I know, I think I'm good to go. Actually, let me check one thing. Okay, the only thing that I was checking when I cut off there was the experience. I am at 39. I got 38 experience just to do encounters, and then I got +1 from the bounty. It is possible to get up to 40 experience, but not with our set, not with what happened with us. It's kind of one of those things where sometimes if you don't do the best, the game will rebalance itself, and sometimes I'll give you extra experience and things like that. So yeah, sitting at 39 experience. I've already spent all of it, essentially, it looks like. But anyway, like I said, I'm not going to go into details about the group yet. Instead, I'm going to go over the rest of the lore. So we got a bunch of lore cards, including those friendly little command cards that we got. So we'll just go down in somewhat pseudo order and read through all of them. Fated Construct. The origin of the Gatekeepers is shrouded in mystery. The best information suggests these doll-like artificial humanoids were brought to life by a being known as the Architect. What the Architect might be or what its motivations are is almost a total mystery. All that is known has come from what the Gatekeepers have said themselves. According to them, the Architect created each of them for a specific purpose. Gatekeepers claim to know what this purpose is, but are typically unwilling to divulge any specifics. Even the name Gatekeeper was something the creatures gave to themselves. Each carries hundreds or thousands of keys, which do tend to work on locks the creatures are likely to encounter. Their keys unlock not only physical doors, but sometimes less literal ones as well. Gatekeepers are intelligent, rational beings. Some are hostile, while others are helpful, depending on what role they believe they must serve to fulfill the destiny the architect gave them. They are just as likely to work to save a town from destruction as they are to try and destroy it themselves. Many gatekeepers build small constructs they call puppets. They make puppets to assist them, much in the same way that the architect created the gatekeepers. They are controlled by their makers to protect or destroy on the gatekeeper's behalf. Not much is known about how puppets are created, or what life, if any, they really have. What is apparent, however, is that each puppet becomes nothing more than a lifeless doll when their controlling gatekeeper is killed. This has led many to compare the architect and their gatekeepers to the relationship between gatekeepers and puppets. Individual gatekeepers vary widely in appearance, but they are all humanoid in shape. Even humanoid is a broad generality. Individuals are not restricted to a human number of appendages, nor is there any universal rule as to what material are used to build them. Some say that the architect was constantly experimenting, trying to perfect his creations. No one knows if the architect ever achieved that perfection, but it is clear that not all gatekeepers were created equal. Big giant tree. Grotesque Effigy. Fruits of Decay. Grotesque Effigies are not the only sentient plants in Middara, but they are definitely one of the most dangerous. These ambulatory trees will attack anything they encounter without provocation. They will hunt unwary or careless creatures and attempt to bind them in their roots before dragging them into its trunk to be devoured. The roots of the Grotesque Effigy run deep into the earth and can sprawl over hundreds of yards. These roots can burst forth from the ground and attack. The Grotesque Effigy can also use these tunneled roots to pull itself along, allowing it terrifying mobility. Destroying these roots is usually the first step to killing the Grotesque Effigy itself. Occasionally, instead of eating a victim, a grotesque effigy will encase them in its bark. The unfortunate soul is then kept alive with a steady trickle of sap into their veins, slowly replacing their blood. Fortunate victims do not survive the transfusion, but those who do are transformed into effigy dryads. They become malicious creatures with tough, woody skin and venomous fangs. Effigy dryads seem to have a single purpose: to create new grotesque effigies. The moment it separates from its creator, a dryad will begin to seek out an appropriate tree to infect. The dryad will rip away the leaves, gnawing on branches and twigs, seeping its venom into the tree's sap. Using its powerful claws, the dryad will dig up the tree's roots so that it may inject venom into the root system as well. It will continue brutalizing the tree in this manner for days, sometimes weeks, until it senses the tree has sufficiently rotted inside. Finally, the effigy dryad will burrow into the decayed wood of the trunk. Its consciousness is thought to pass into the tree, and it becomes a new grotesque effigy. Naturalists are not sure if the grotesque effigy is a natural occurring creature or the result of magic gone awry. Regardless of their origins, they remain a danger to those who traverse the deep woods and swamps of Valenia. Lana, the corrupted nymph. Corrupted nymph. Lana watched as her sister struggled to take her final breath. Jackie twitched, sap-like blood oozing from her lips. Her skin was bruised and wilted, like a piece of mistreated fruit. The nymph reached one grasping hand towards Lana, fingers curled into claws. "I'm here," she said, grasping the outstretched fingers. "You're not alone." But Jackie didn't even feel like a person anymore. Even a modest grip crumbled to her fingers, oozing dark sap. Jackie gasped. Whatever she tried to say, Lana couldn't understand. Lana had been with her for 15 years, from the day she first sprouted. Lana herself was the same age. She knew that rotting feeling. It wouldn't be long before she was on this deathbed, surrounded by nymphs who could do nothing against their worst enemy. It wasn't enough time. How could it be? Lana couldn't help it as the thoughts raced over and over in her head. Jackie reached out, grasping at Lana's wrist, her eyes wide with agony. Why wouldn't she just die? But Jackie was stubborn. Instead, she wallowed and struggled until Lana couldn't take it anymore. The memories of their companionship became tainted by the image of her gaping mouth, rotting teeth, and desiccated skin. This wasn't how Lana wanted to remember her. She rose to her feet and took a step back as Jackie grabbed for her. She couldn't watch it anymore. Lana had told her sisters that she stayed at Jackie's side until the end, but she knew the truth. She let her best friend die alone and spent the evening weeping. In the end, she wasn't brave enough to be there for her. I won't die like that. I'm not ready. Cassius, the dominated worm. Nymph society expected Alana to embrace her Mayfly lifespan and to face death like it was something to be celebrated. Alana refused. She researched for a way to stop it. She researched the Middara's humans and longed for what they had, to never age, to live forever. Her studies eventually led her to an old legend, told to her by one of the lucky elders who lived beyond 20 years. She spoke of an ancient colony of nymphs that her mother once described to her, that had been betrayed by one of their own. A rogue nymph had sworn herself to a forest worm, and the creature drove her to madness. The nymph returned to her colony and devoured her sisters before taking her own life. Obviously, the outcome wasn't ideal, but the method was brilliant. Alana couldn't believe she hadn't thought of it before. The creatures were not easy to find, but they were known for their incredibly long lives. With its vital energy coursing through her veins, she'd be certain to live far more than the decade or two nymphs hoped for. Alana plotted. Within the year, she found a worm suitable for the bomb. She named it Cassius. She spent months taming it, and soon the worm became like a pet to her. One night, while Lana was sneaking out of her colony, her sisters caught her with the worm. Afraid of her attentions, they locked Alana up. She was told that she'd stayed in prison until death took her, and they would be merciful enough to plant her seed despite her crime. Alana couldn't believe the betrayal. Her own sisters were so indoctrinated by the elders they were willing to kill her before the process was complete. Days passed, and Lana felt herself withering. She used her calling to reach out for Cassius each day, and eventually it answered. Cassius arrived, breaking her out of the cage and slaughtering the nymphs who tried to stop them. As soon as she was free, she finished what she had started, and the two of them were fused. Suri. A friend made manifest. Suri had watched Rook and the others as they descended into the ruins of Gehenna. She was keen to see such an ancient city built by those from her native realm, even if it tore out her heart to see it come to such decay. What had once been beautiful was now entirely overcome with decay. This entire endeavor seemed like a fool's errand, but she would always be there to support Rook. He had shown her kindness and had a sharp mind. She understood the humans of Middara had much better thanks to his instruction. As they descended into the sunken library, it became clear that the danger they faced was more serious than they expected. It seemed to be a trend with these humans, and Suri could hardly imagine immortal beings risking their eternal lives so recklessly. But they were in much too far to turn back now. Remy was growing concerned for Rook. He hadn't been able to rest since they had arrived, and it was beginning to show. He had been tending to the injured Remy, and as usual he put the safety of others before his own. It was something that Suri liked about him. If a friend was in need, he never hesitated. It was strange to her, but also reassuring. She didn't doubt that he would be there to offer that same help to her if she ever needed it. Now Rook was alone, standing guard over an injured Remy. Monsters were closing in, and all help was gone. He might die here if she didn't intervene, but if she did, there was a chance the Great Bounty would realize what she'd done. It wasn't a likely outcome, but it was a possibility. What would Rook do? The answer was obvious. Rook would never leave her in danger, regardless of the consequences. She manifested next to him as he prepared to fight and gave him a confident nod. Selfless love. I could get used to this. Zafir, champion of the anointed. Zafir sat with his back against the wall of his cell. He still couldn't believe that he had been so stupid. He should have been able to see such an obvious trap. But this was the Library of Gehenna, where he could finally learn the real purpose of the Pontifex. The lure of information had blinded him. Now he was rotting away in some monstrosity's pantry, waiting for his turn to be devoured. He scanned the cage with a glance, taking in the anointed still alive. They had already lost a few to the treacherous Library of Gehenna, and the ones who were left weren't looking good. Soldiers slumped, eyes fixed on the floor. The constant whispers about escape plans had all failed with their fourth failed attempt. Zafir had racked his brain trying to think of a way to escape, but none of his ideas had taken them anywhere yet. The bars of their cell were thicker than a man's arm, and they didn't have any tools for cutting steel. Occasionally, a gatekeeper would come by and check on them, but it never opened their cage. The gatekeeper carried so many keys that the odds of Zafir getting his hands on the right one was minuscule. Zafir found his mind wandering back to the surface, to Justice and the escort he had sent with her. He hoped that they would come looking for him, but dreaded it at the same time. If they died here too, then no one would know what happened to them. Someone had to report back to the others. Someone had to make sure that Charon never escaped his tomb. For now, Zafir would have to take comfort in the knowledge that the Anointed would carry on, no matter what. He palmed the shiv he'd been working on for the last few days, its rusty metal shape worn into a fine point with hours of patience. When the Lichworm came for him, he wouldn't go down without a fight. Ezra, Anointed Rogue. Ezra hit the ground hard. Damn, I really thought I had you that time, he groaned, sitting up and rubbing at his back. Zafir's throat face cracked with a faint smile. Get up. You'll have to be better than this if you expect to fight against the bastards in the Council of Abhorrence. He extended a hand, and Ezra took it, hauling himself to his feet. His training was grueling, and he always hurt like hell the next morning, but then they'd be attacked by wild animals or ambushed by thieves, and something he'd practiced would save his life, so he kept practicing. Zafir never held back, either. If Ezra wasn't on his toes, Zafir wouldn't hesitate to bruise him badly enough that he'd be limping for a week. But that was part of the thrill. Ezra had watched Zafir with admiration since he joined the Anointed. His passion and prowess convinced Ezra that this was a cause worth fighting for, and that they could prevail. Before joining, he'd float listlessly through his eternal life, drifting between odd jobs and never sticking to anything. Now he lived for something greater than himself. Zafir seemed to sense this about him. Zafir had lived much longer than Ezra, who was quite young by Middara's standards, and Ezra took a great pleasure in hearing about Zafir's life and adventures. Ezra went on the attack again, throwing a feint and following it up with a swift strike that caught Zafir in the stomach. In response, Zafir dropped into a roll, sweeping a leg out from under Ezra. It seemed that each time Ezra won a small victory, Zafir would quickly even the score. He'd just have to work that much harder. Bria, the Anointed Mage. Bria, Cassius called. Can I have a word? He beckoned with a calloused hand. Bria followed him through the dark stone hallway. What is it? She asked, already knowing the answer. I need you to go with Zafir. He's determined to go back to Elenia, Cassius said, rubbing his temples with exhausted slowness. His voice still sounded strained from the shouting match he just had with Zafir. He believes that we must take action to keep Sharon at bay. He boos to escape the tomb. It was as Bria had feared. Cassius and the other leaders of the Anointed were worried that he would go half-cocked and do something regrettable. Then people would die, another kingdom would lose face in the Anointed, and Zafir would claim it was all in the name of the greater good, but they couldn't just say no. I'm not sure if there will be anything of use to us in Elenia, but it is certain to be dangerous. Keep an eye on him, Cassius said, putting a hand on her shoulder. He's our last surviving founder, and he knows Sharon better than anyone still living. Don't let him die. Of course, Bria agreed. Do you think that Zafir is... She looked away, too ashamed to finish her sentence. Crazy? Cassius asked. No. Zafir has seen a lot in his lifetime, more than any of us. I think that he can lose sight of more immediate needs. He puts Sharon's imprisonment above fighting the rest of the Council of Abhorrence. It's hard to blame him, but we can't spare too many resources dealing with a threat that is already contained. I understand, Bria saluted. Will there be anything else? Cassius shook his head. Make sure you are well prepared. He knows Zafir's history of leading adventuring parties into danger. Bria sighed. She knew. And there you go. So that is all the new lore cards that are available to us. Obviously, we'll run into more as we progress. There's one lore card I will probably never get to see, which is a little unfortunate, but that's just how the narrative plays out. But in any case, I'm going to go ahead and call it here. And when we come back, we'll, of course, continue on with some side quests and all that good stuff, as well as go over what my new setup is. So, I am The Depressed Dealer. This was Middara on Tabletop Simulator. See you guys later.